Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gentrification of the Mountain West panel. I'm Erica Fredrickson, and I will be facilitating, but hopefully we'll have a conversation for a while and some readings and then some questions and have a conversation with all of you as well. So I just want to first, let me know if I'm forgetting anything, but I want to just first do an introduction of our panel and of their work very briefly, and then we'll kind of just jump in. Ryanne, Pilgeram, well, maybe I'll start here. Let's start in order. Chris LaTray is a Métis storyteller, descendant of the Pembina band of the mighty Red River of the North, and an enrolled member of the Little Shell tribe of Chippewa Indians. He writes the weekly newsletter, An Irritable Métis. Am I saying that right? Métis. Oh my gosh, I should have checked that with you. On Substack, and lives near Missoula, Montana. Then we've got Dr. Ryanne Pilgeram was born and raised in Montana. Her work as professor of rural sociology at the University of Idaho is inspired by her connection to people in rural communities, and she hopes it supports efforts to envision a world where all people can thrive. Next, we have Ken Grinde, who grew up in Big Fork, moved 22 times before getting his film degree from Middlebury College. He lived in Los Angeles for 5 years, working in sustainable food logistics, cutting videos, and drumming in punk bands. He moved to Missoula in 2016 to start his own video production company and produce live theater. Ken lives on 3rd Street with his piano and 4 succulents. I used to live next to Ken. So I mentioned Chris's project, and I wanted to say Ryanne's is a new book called Pushed Out, and we'll talk about that. And Ken is actually and it's too bad it's before, we can't tell people about this production. It's sold out anyway. So Rent or Die is, I'm sorry, Jesse too, we have added on here because Jesse is part of this production. You're an appendage, and I'm going to have you introduce yourself too. But Rent or Die was first a reading in a backyard and then became a production most recently. And I'll have them talk a little more about that and do a reading of it, which will be really fun and entertaining. And so I don't want to talk too much, but I just want to say maybe we can all keep in mind one thing. I don't think I'm the only one that struggles with this, but with sort of defining not just the dictionary definition of gentrification, but kind of understanding what it is and what it means in communities and who's affected and, how it plays out in different ways. And so talking about that as we go would be really great so that we kind of all understand a little bit better. So I'll just start with some questions, and then you can talk about whatever you want. So can we, Ryanne, will you talk a little bit first about Pushed Out and kind of where you started with it? I know it's a story of Dover, Idaho, and I just want to know first, like, kind of how you came to that story and to that town and what happened with it.
So I want to start by defining rural gentrification because I think that's helpful because I think it kind of underscores kind of what the book is about in certain ways. So rural gentrification is defined as a shift in population from urban areas to rural areas. But one of the key factors is those populations have economic, social, and cultural power to change the community. So we can think about populations move and change. So we think about that as tied to power, first and foremost. And some of the hallmarks of rural gentrification that are different than urban gentrification are that you see a change. It's difficult for intergenerational connection under rural gentrification. So in urban communities, when communities are gentrified, the whole population gets kind of shoved out. In rural communities, usually the older generations are able to stay because they have equity in their homes, but it causes intergenerational displacement. So people's kids and grandkids can't be part of the fabric of their community again. They can't afford to live there. So I think that's important, right? It's about power, and it's also in rural communities about that intergenerational loss that happens. I also think it's a terrible term, and I think that's kind of what the book is about. What I think gentrification actually is a result of the way we have organized our economy and our social structure. Gentrification is just a different way of saying inequality, right? And it pinpoints a spatial relationship to inequality, but we can see that inequality in all sorts of places, which kind of brings me to my book. So I grew up in Gold Creek, Montana. Most of my family's from Helena. I went to school in Gold Creek. I was the only second grader after my friend was held back in first grade. And we lost our ranch during the farm crisis, and it was really sad. And we moved around a lot. I moved first to Missoula, where I met my best friend in third grade, who's here with me today, and then Kalispell, and then Sandpoint, and then a bunch of other places. So I moved around a lot. And the last place I ended up was in Sandpoint, Idaho. And we lived in this little house in kind of a no man's land between Sandpoint and Dover. And when I moved there, I rode the Dover school bus, became friends with all the Dover kids. And Dover had been a mill town, and the mill had burned down. And the kids were really nice, and I made a lot of connections there, like my first boyfriend and my first car accident, all sorts of pivotal life events in Dover, Idaho. Went away to college and to grad school, and I realized that the community, the mill site was being developed into a 600-unit upscale development. And that made me feel really sad. I had big emotions around that, right, to watch this place change. And finished my PhD and got a job at the University of Idaho and got tenure and thought, I am going to finally write the book I want to write about this community because I probably can't get fired now for saying what I think. And so I went back and did 30 interviews and did tons of archival work and tried to understand what had happened to this community. And one of the things that occurred to me as I was writing this book, one of the things that makes Dover really interesting is it's a great case study because it's one of the few places where the whole development was within the city confines. So the city council actually got to decide if the land was going to be rezoned from agricultural to a planned use committee. And why would these working class railroadmen and timber workers, why would they rezone their community? It didn't make sense to me, so I wanted to understand that. And it was a great case study because it was a little different than a lot of places in Montana where it's the county commissioners or like these kind of groups that are hard to put your finger on who controls zoning. It was all the city council. Why would they do that, right? So I was like, I'm going to answer that question. And I quickly realized that because of the way my brain works, I needed to keep asking more questions. So the second chapter of the book is called A Short History of the Last 62 Million Years. And I think one of the, and I'm really glad Chris is here, and I think hopefully he can speak more to this, but I didn't really want to title the book this. Your publisher gets to pick your title. And one of the things that I had to contend with in this book is that what is happening to rural communities, the reason that we could build a sawmill in North Idaho is because the Kalispell people had attended to the land since time immemorial, and when the railroad showed up, they saw the biggest trees they had ever seen in their entire lives. What made that place valuable, what made it prosperous, was that care and attention. And then that community faced genocide, right? And those spaces, they were pushed off those spaces. And I think one of the things I try and do in my book is contend with that long arc of history. Where did we start? How does that impact people today? And what will our history look like if we don't intervene in different ways? So I think that's a quick answer to that question. Long answer, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you opened the door for me right there perfectly. I mean, the other word for whatever the original word we thought of for gentrification is colonialism, right? So, like I did a reading in Whitefish here, I don't know, 3 months ago, and it starts with a land acknowledgement, which I'm so glad we didn't do a land acknowledgement here because I freaking hate them. And I'll tell you why, because we talk about who this land is the traditional land of, and then immediately a bunch of folks in Whitefish started complaining about how they can't afford to live there anymore. And I'm like, welcome to the last 500 fucking years, you know, for indigenous people, because that's how it is. It's the same struggle. You've got people who are in a place that grew up there, that live there, that are trying to live in some form of connection to the land, and then someone with more wealth and power and the backing of a colonial government fully complicit in the elimination of the people who were already there. It doesn't matter if it was the Turtle Mountains in the 1870s or Missoula in 2022. It's the same thing. The people who have everything are coming and taking from the people who can't stand up for themselves. And that isn't just today an indigenous issue. It's a class issue because you know the working class people now aren't the people who, like my dad, who worked at the mill for 43 or 44 years ago. Now it's service workers. So people come here and they want to have all of these amenities that makes Missoula such a cool place. You know, you want to go on raft trips, and you want to have guides, and you want to have yoga teachers, and you want to have people pouring you coffee every day, and you want all of these things, but where are those people supposed to live? So that it's just the same thing playing out over and over again. And what makes me angry when it comes to land acknowledgements is, are you just trying to bullshit me, or do we really want to include this in the conversation of how we're going to change? I mean, because we're literally, there's like a photograph, if it's still at the airport, I don't know if it is or not because they've changed everything, of a bunch of teepees like right here, you know, at ground level, a bunch of teepees. And I don't even think they're Salish. I think they're Blackfeet. Because this corridor, even though we talk about it being traditionally Salish land, was like an indigenous superhighway for several thousand years. Everybody from the west came through here to get east to hunt buffalo, and vice versa, to trade. The Blackfeet and the Salish and my people, the Plains Chippewa, would gather here, right here. Where are we, right? So are we going to include us in these conversations, in how are we going to fix this? How are we going to make it affordable to live in these communities when, you know, we got to kind of rebuild some stuff, right? So where are we going to start? Are we going to start in 1950? Are we going to start in 1900? Or are we going to start in like 1700 and say, how are we going to redefine the way we want to live? Because we all want the same things, right? We all want a place to live. We all want to be happy. We all want to have our families happy. We want to have a safe place. And that's just not how it's been playing out here ever. We talked about how we were both going to probably talk too much. I think I'm ahead of you now, so.
This was my sneaky way of talking to people in North Idaho about settler colonialism. By framing it in a way, trying to frame it in a way that offered so much evidence and so many details that it made that argument clear without having to explicitly use the terms for a while. Mm-hmm. And to connect their pain and frustration and anger to what had happened before them. Because I think we need to be able to see the ways that power operates in each of our lives, to see our destinies as like connected. And if we can't do that, the people with power win.
Right.
Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah. I'm struck by a lot of. I think that, first of all, Jesse and I didn't write a book, so we're kind of interlopers here. But I think that the reason why what we're really talking about up here is that these massive scale things also come down to the super granular, you know, the things that do happen on a daily, weekly, you know, on the basis of just one individual life, and then also have happened over thousands of years. And for me, this concept of displacement, of colonialism, the way that we do understand that, the way that I do understand it, is interruption of momentum. You know, that if you take money out of the soul of a place, what you wind up with is all these strands of momentum, families or projects or businesses or just people being present in a place and contributing in an active way to that. And when money is inserted into that and that is called a commodity, then you interrupt it. And it's not supposed to be a monetized system. And the idea that homes are being considered for high cash flow portfolio pieces is incongruous. It doesn't make any sense. These are not financial things. And, just as you're talking about the trees having grown for all that time under the stewardship of the indigenous people in that area, and that made it valuable, I think in a similar way, all of us see on a small scale in a place like Missoula, so many people who have been here for 50, 60, 70 years, or families who have been here contributing in small ways as artists or as community workers or as organizers or business owners. And their contribution is priceless. But to someone, it has made it into this cool thing that now has a valuation put on it. They're like, well, Missoula's this cool. Missoula's $1 million for this house cool. And I think that just frustrates us all. I know that this frustrates us all to no end. The reason why I mentioned in my bio that Erica read that I moved 23 times by the time I turned 23, or I moved 23 times by the time I turned 21, was I was raised by a single mom in the Flathead. I grew up in Big Fork, which if anyone knows what happened to Big Fork between 1965 when my grandparents moved there and now, you know that I'm not welcome there anymore. And I'm not saying that to say that that is not an experience that so many of us have had, but I think Big Fork is sort of like a glaring example of how fast money can make some place completely inhospitable and a ghost town in the winter. And my mom and dad moved there in 1977. My mom helped start the Big Fork Summer Playhouse after she had just started the Hungry Horse Playhouse. And my dad was a carpenter there. And at that time, the town was lively in the summer with tourists and then lively all winter long with local events. And that's just not the case anymore. It's just so dead in the winter and intergenerational for sure. Older people are still there. The old folks I still know. Don Thompson, God bless his heart, still running the Playhouse. And old folks are still there because they own their homes. But everyone my age, I couldn't live in Big Fork. And if I did, there wouldn't be anything there for me to do. Anyway, so I would just say that I think that there is this grand scale and then the small scale, and I think that we're talking about the same thing. Something that is priceless, that is not measurable going into what makes these communities, what makes life worth living, what makes communities have soul. And then someone else comes in and tries to put a price on it, and it just pisses me off. It pisses all of us off. That's not supposed to be a priced thing.
So I'm a political economist, so I have to talk about the economy piece, because I think one of the things, I think this is the most important part of my book, right? So I use this analysis called the spatial fix, and it looks at how economies operate. And it says that we can think about space being monetized in three ways, right? So we create a place for capitalism. So for the railroad in North Idaho, they took this space that had been the homeland of the Kalispel people, is the homeland of the Kalispel people, and they monetized the trees, right? Build this timber. The timber workers, you can read the book, but right? Basically what happens is the people in the mill loses, it's not affordable to run the mill anymore. It's unionized, it burns down, all these things happen. The town is economically depressed. And what I argue in the book, so this is step one, is you build a space. Step two is that people with power destroy that space in order to then profit off that space, right? So the devaluation process is actually super essential to being able for people with wealth to reinvest in see that wealth increase. So one of the things I tell communities, or if I'm going to tell communities something, it's that investing in your infrastructure and making your community strong when it feels weak is a really important way to protect yourself against these kind of inflationary trends. And the other thing I think is just that we cannot keep thinking about these boom and bust cycles that happen as natural, right? For most of human history, this is not how people have lived. Most of human history in this place, this is not how people lived. We have lived like this for maybe 200 years. And it is not, we all feel horrible because it's not the way we're supposed to live under this constant economic stress. It's not good for us. But we can understand, I think understanding kind of the cycles of what we're seeing, and like you can look at it Bonner, for example, right? Who wanted to live in Bonner? And now they're writing about it in the newspapers, things like that. So those letting things get economically depressed is part of the process. And you can look at things like Puerto Rico, or when there are big natural event or natural disasters that happen, that then people go up and buy up all that property. So it's not just, right, this is not actually something happening in the West. This is, I think, a global phenomenon. It's part of our global kind of economic structure. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of difficult sometimes to wrap our heads around, is it's both hyper-local, and this is about our global economic trends and pressures. And so it's not just Idaho, it's not Montana, it's the whole, most of the world is experiencing this.
Yeah, I mean, and to bring it back to it's trendy, like I was mentioning with land acknowledgements now, to say, well, when it comes to forest fires, we need to think about how Indigenous people lived with fire. We have to think about how Indigenous people lived with the forests we're talking about, and we have to think about just this way of thinking about it. And it's a total mind shift, because do you put a price on your child? Do you put a price on your cousin? Do you put a price on your grandfather when it comes to what their worth is to the community? Indigenous people, and I can't speak to the cosmological view of the Kalispel people, but I can of the Anishinaabe people, and of all of our affiliated tribes, we're like the third largest in North America, if you include Canada. And our view is these are our relatives. So when I say bonjour, my relatives, I'm saying hello to all of you, to the trees, to the animals, to the fish, to the birds, everybody. And we are living with them in a way, the same way that we would live with the people, 3 teepees down, that leave their fire burning too late at night, That was an Indian joke, by the way. The room just went, what? Right. So that's the difference in and it comes back to housing too, like the capitalization of housing. Like shouldn't Indigenous people, if you couldn't afford to live in the village, you weren't kicked out, right? Because everybody had a place to live, and that was part of what it meant to be a community, is everybody had a place to live. Drive up and down Broadway and you'll see dozens, if not scores, if not hundreds of people who don't have a place to live. And that's kind of our responsibility, because we're the ones who are letting all these things happen. And it's hard to not let them happen. But that is the worldview. It's air, Having a place to live is the same as being able to breathe the air, isn't it? It's the same as being able to eat. It's the same as being able to drink. All of these simple things that we absolutely have to have, we try and commercialize every single one, or we allow these sons of bitches to commercialize every single one. Water is not far behind Airbnbs, So it's that shift in what is important. This capitalist self-eating monster that takes from all of us eventually, maybe not some of you today, but it's coming for you, the way it's come for many of us already. And we have to just shift that mindset for how do we want our society to work. Because like I said, everybody should have a place to live. Everybody should have food. Everybody should have clean water. And that's not the path we're on.
You want to ask?
Yeah.
Do you have any?
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I will read part of my.
You guys want to do your play?
Yeah, you do your
Yeah, you want to start off?
I hope it's funny.
Funny is relative. We hope it's funny too. Yeah. The part we're gonna read has some funny parts, but it's more kind of the, I guess, part of the thesis of the play. Oh yeah. Well, I'll say first that Jesse will give us a little. Oh, nice. Jesse can give us a little bit of a setup for where we're at in the play here, where we're going to read. But I just want a very quick addendum to what Chris was saying is to say that, these sons of bitches who are capitalizing everything, these other people, I think that in the long view, anyone out there who wants to see all of the basic needs demonetized, the short view of that is to add some personalization into this, which is to say move away from monopolization of it, which is to say move into more communal ownership and non-monetized living structures. It's a way that, the idea of more owners, I think, is sort of an incremental, a step toward that non-monetizing where you just have more people, more of the wealth is spread out. And I think that when you do have those communities where more people own and there is less monopolization of housing and land, you do find more human approaches to living. And I say this with relevance to the reading because, Chris talking about these people out here who are monetizing our basic needs. If you ever find them, which is so hard because they're so elusive, they hide. It's really hard to find out who actually owns any of these things or any of these big institutions or these monopolies. And if you do ever find them and talk to them, they will skirt it. I mean, they will say that it's not personal, it's just business, and it's not a human interaction for them. It's they'll take you out of the equation. Anyway, so do you want to set up where we are in this show?
Oh, yeah, I'll just say I'm Jesse. I'm from Kalispell, which is where I met Ken way back when. Lived there for my whole life until college. Lived in New York City for 10 years and moved back here. And I've been here for the last 4 years. And so that's who I am. And I'll just say, this play is, we call it a housing farce. Our goal was to be funny and to make everyone have a good time. But we took the backdrop of it's set in Missoula, and we looked around at what was happening, and we took the obvious instances of conflict that lead to good drama or comedy. There's more I could say on what you just said, but I'll just say the play is about a bunch of renters who live in a classic Missoula fourplex, and one of the units is an Airbnb, which they reluctantly pitch in to help. Their landlord gives them a meager break in rent, and they're sort of strong-armed into running this Airbnb. They don't love it, but what can you do? And then they find out that the building's actually going to be for sale. They're all being evicted. That's the inciting incident. And this is the scene where the tenants, four tenants actually, find out that their current Airbnb guest, who they have up to this point really enjoyed the company of, is actually the representative of the holding company or financial firm that is actually buying the building.
And tearing it down.
Spoiler.
Sorry. I thought you said that part.
No, I specifically didn't say it. There are a bunch of characters, I think, for simplicity's sake. Do you want to read Oren, or shall I?
I'll read Oren.
So for simplicity's sake, Ken is going to read the Airbnb guest who turns out to be the buyer. I'm going to sort of read all the other characters' lines because, as you'll see, it's a quick-moving scene. They kind of flow together. So it's not that important to know who the other characters are.
Are you going to do a bunch of accents?
No. Do you want to start with...
Yeah.
So It's just been revealed. They just found out they're being evicted, and they realize that this company that's buying the building, Dorfman Brothers, is the employer of this person.
Yeah.
You want to start with I Can Explain?
Yeah. I can explain.
How could you?
I didn't do anything. Dorfman Brothers acquired the property. I work for them. They sent me here to close the deal. I'm just a junior partner. I didn't choose any of this.
But you said you'd never want to be a landlord.
Oh, God, and I wouldn't, and I'm not. Again, Dorfman Brothers will be the new landlord.
And will Dorfman Brothers be extending our rental contracts?
No.
But you told us we should paint the walls.
Well, I figured it wouldn't really matter since they're tearing the place down. I'm so sorry.
Okay, so what can we do to stop it?
Nothing. I mean, nothing.
There must be something.
I know, but there isn't. I mean, you said it yourself. Bobby owns this place, and he's very committed to selling.
Motherfucker.
Okay, you said... Oh, sorry.
But you said that renters should have rights. I mean, we've lived here for years.
Well, I agree you should have rights, but you don't. I really am sorry. It's really not personal, Callie. You said it yourself. Missoula is a great place, and that's because of people like all of you. You've made it so great that people want to move here, and when they move here, they have to live somewhere.
We have to live somewhere.
Well, maybe you could live here again once they tear it down and rebuild it.
And how many units are they building?
2?
And will the rent be the same?
No, it will be much higher. They will be condos, sort of luxury condos.
You motherfucker. And then he exits.
Yeah.
So that's a small scene. That is just the sort of, oh, and then sorry, I cut us off a little close. The tenants all confer amongst themselves. I can't believe it.
I'll be Callie. You want to be everything? Yeah. Okay, so there has to be a way.
There isn't a way.
Right, but there has to be something.
There isn't something.
But there has to be something we can do.
Callie, there's nothing we can do. We've been lucky to last this long.
There's that word again.
Most of my friends have had to move in the last 5 years. We had a good run, but the town is changing. There's nothing we can do.
Wrong. We can kill him.
And that's where it turns farcical. All I'll say on that is, for my part, that, like I said, we set out to just tell a story that was entertaining and touched on these things without beating everyone over the head with them because, everyone gets it right away, what's going on. The thing about the play that has stuck with me since writing it and doing it is that the company buying the buildings, the Dorfman brothers, you never meet them. And I realized at one point talking with someone about the play that they might as well be Greek gods in a tragedy who have sent down this plague because they're so depersonified. And everyone you actually meet is sort of a pawn in this system, even the terrible person buying the building who you hate. I mean, it's true, it is his fault. He's there to buy the building for them, but at the same time, he's working in the same system that's paying him to do this thing. And it's not hopeless in that regard, but I think there's a tragic element that really came truer and truer for me to everyone's wonderful points here about the fact that the people who make these decisions are nameless, faceless. They don't live in these communities, and so then what do? We turn on each other and we start fighting, and sometimes rightly so, because people do bad things. But I lived in New York for 10 years, and I also dislike the term gentrification for the reasons you said, but also because I felt like it had got turned into this ground level thing where it all became about individual choices of who wants to live where. And if we all just stopped moving places, everything would be fine, which is, like you're saying, not how it works. The question is, how do you move places and not destroy the community that's already there? And that can't be solved through people just saying, I'm going to stop moving apartments. I'm just going to stay put. And so, yeah, the question becomes, what's the system that allows healthy growth and healthy change and protected change and not just a wild exploitation? That's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I keep coming back to when I was doing the interviews for this book and trying to write it in a way that I didn't get sued. The people had a lot of anger directed towards the developer, so much anger, and lots of and there's all sorts of Nancy Drew things. And the first time I wrote the draft of the book, it was a Nancy Drew book, right? Kind of like, why are 32 tapes blank? Why did they break this law? And I finally had to kind of step back and think, well, I'm a social scientist, and this person gets to do this because the rules allow him to. And so if it wasn't him, maybe it'd be a really nice guy who did this, but it's going to look the same. And so it's not about the individuals involved. It is, of course, but it also is about those structures. I'm going to read a little bit of the conclusion of my book. It was really important to me as I was writing this book to try and write it in a way that was welcoming to all sorts of people who might be interested in reading it. So I tried to write it in a way that's less academic and more welcoming, because not all academic writing is very welcome, I don't think. Okay, conclusion. Everything that's old is new again. And I've given my community the development the pseudonym of Mill Lake. So, Mill Lake is a simulacra for an American West that never existed. Mill Lake is old-timey street lamps and fountains set against the scenic beauty of the river and the mountains. Mill Lake is sparkling new Dover City Hall that sits on the lake's edge with vaulted ceilings and exposed beams, showing off timber that at one time would have been harvested by Dover residents and processed at the Dover Mill, but today probably came from Canada. Mill Lake means realtors rushing around looking for the omnipresent moose to entice buyers with a, quote, Mill Lake moment, hoping that the moose doesn't charge when they find it. What's missing from this simulacra, of course, are the people of Old Dover, who in small and large ways are erased from the community. Each single change is magnified against a backdrop of historic changes. Today in Old Dover, a maroon 4-H bus sits in someone's yard. It is half storage unit and half garden statue, a reminder of a time when a small community could fill a bus with kids and head to a neighboring community equally full of kids. In Mill Lake, streets are named after the old-timers whose families settled Dover, but whose children cannot afford to live on the streets that bear their names. What happened in Dover is happening across the Pacific Northwest and the American West more broadly. Communities that undergo processes like this are sometimes referred to as lucky, since the alternative in the American West is to essentially be erased off the map. The winners of these processes talk about rural revitalization, but the process is inherently uneven. Wealth only returns to areas that were previously exploited in a boom and bust cycle by people who accumulated their wealth elsewhere. When wealth returns, it must extract the resources of the community again. Now, instead of clearing timber, workers clear tables, and they fight to survive in an especially exploitive service economy. In which Idaho law in 2020 set the minimum wage for tipped workers at $3.35 an hour. For the residents of Old Dover, this doesn't feel like a revitalization. But the processes and histories that brought Mill Lake to Dover and other developments to other communities are often hard to discern. They are obscured behind the notion that the market is a natural force, sweeping across the region in ways that cannot be altered. This often leads to anger from working class people, but it is anger coupled with frustration and apathy. The folks of Old Dover learned a long time ago that their rights as a community were never going to outweigh the prospects of profit. They had gleaned stability and prosperity when their labor was key to making those profits, but now that landowners profited by marketing the scenic beauty of the landscape, there is no longer a place for them, and they have since resigned themselves to this seeming progress. Sometimes this anger at the injustice of the system finds its way to, quote, environmentalists, despite the evidence indicating that the timber companies competing in a global market themselves abandon these communities in order to make profits elsewhere. The anger is then amplified by those who claim that tourist-based economies are more environmentally sound than extractive industries, which is a debatable claim. But more importantly, such claims suggest that the human suffering of the people left behind is an acceptable price to pay to protect the natural world. It suggests that having a beautiful place to tootle around on a motorboat or ski is more important than people's ability to provide for their families. Against these debates, it bears repeating that the market is not a natural force. The practices and policies that we loosely call the free market are anything but free, and they were created by people who benefit from them in order for their interests to seem natural. Across time and throughout history, most people have lived in arrangements that do not lead to these kind of boom and bust cycles that have gripped the American West, and it is possible to create a future that does not rely upon them.
I didn't really come prepared to read anything, but I didn't want to be the only one who didn't, so I've got a poem that's relevant. I'll call it what did we decide? It's not gentrification. What are we calling it now? Here's a displacement poem. This is called 828,000 Square Miles. Did you happen to notice in the midst of all your best efforts at surviving that the other day marked the anniversary of the Louisiana Purchase? I'm not talking about the time you marveled that you could buy a daiquiri from a drive-through window, complete with a straw with all but the very business end of the paper already torn off and pressed into the beverage. I'm not talking about the fake voodoo charms purchased from a comically witchy-looking proprietress in a plasticky shop on Bourbon Street either. No, I mean the epic land grab where the slave-owning rapist Thomas Jefferson doubled the land base of the United States of America with one spirited purchase and acquired territory from a fading colonial empire who never owned it in the first place. We all know this, but how does it even matter? If you picked up someone else's daiquiri or retrieved the wrong package of fake voodoo charms, on having it pointed out, you would have given it right back, wouldn't you? Or would you have lied or denied and even gotten away with murder to keep it?
I do want to get to people's questions and anything more you want to talk about, but I also am interested in, and you've, Ryanne, talked a little bit about it with your book. What what do we do now? You know, what are not looking for you know a positive spin on things, but looking at what are people doing now that's working, and what are you seeing, all of you, that's changing. Because just quickly for me, you know, I grew up here and I've learned the history of my colonialism as my background. And over time, I've learned how to feel sort of angry when new people have come in here. And then having conversations with people who said, well, I came here because I was displaced from somewhere else, but I have more money than you, so I'm going to buy this place. And then they don't even know this is a neighbor who I have become friends with. And it's like, then they say, I'm part of the problem, and they're so crushed. And then they're like, what am I supposed to do? So what are we supposed to do with these waves of, you know, who's responsible and how we move a community forward in some way?
Oh, I hate this question so much. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things but I get it all the time, and I also love it because it is the question we need to answer. So on the one hand, I think I have finally made my peace with saying it is okay to write a book without answers, because one of the things sociology, my discipline, which I love very much, allows us to do is to think about the world. And you cannot build a different world until you can imagine a different world. And it is okay to sit and imagine a different world and imagine what it would look like, because I think that is the first step. I also think our solutions have to be global, national, state, city, and community-based. It is all of the above. So like I think I just read in the state of Montana, 20 to 25% of homes are now owned by banks essentially, or investors. Maybe we work at the community level, our city level, to say that we will not support that, right? We write policy to do that. We elect people who will change those policies. But I think you know, one of the things I'm trying to work on in Idaho, or just even in my community in Idaho, is renters' rights, right? Like what does it look like on the granular level? So I think it's all of the above, and I also think each community kind of needs their own solutions. And I've been doing a lot of these talks, and I've been amazed at how many people keep showing up. And I think one of the things that we do is we look around spaces like this and we think, okay, these are the people who care about this issue. And really all it takes is like 2 or 3 of them to decide they're going to be the most annoying person in the world about this issue, that they no longer care about making friends, right? They are going to be so annoying that they are at least going to model what that change looks like in their apartment complex. And then and you do such a good job that the state of Montana gets annoyed and passes a law that you aren't allowed to pass city regulations, right? And then you pass a ballot initiative, right? I don't know what the solutions look like, but I do know that they tend to involve 1 or 2 really annoying people demanding change, and that when people see that change happening, suddenly they think you're cool and popular and they want to be your friend and they want to know you, and suddenly you kind of have this group of people. But sometimes it takes being annoying and having a couple wins by yourself to have people who then want to grab on your coattails and say like, I've known her ever since and we're going to do this great work together.
I think part of it too, Erica, you kind of alluded to with your neighbor in the communication that we have to have with people that we would normally not communicate because we think they're not our people. Like I had a neighbor who just moved out, but he was across the street from me for 9 years. Trump stickers on the back of his truck, you know, I support our police on his front door, all this stuff. But he was friendly. We got along, and we have to accept or consider that sometimes some of these stickers and this posturing is like an identity thing. And if we can kind of make or come together, because, you know, amazingly, I might be wrong sometimes too. If we can get together at the level of that, like neighbors, and have conversations that show that we are more alike than not. You know, the guy's dogs obviously love him, which is a good sign. I mean, and I'm dead serious on that, you know, and we had a neighbor kitty corner from us whose power got shut off, and it was the Trump guy is what I referred to him as. His wife came over, and we ran extension cords across our two houses to her house until Monday could come around and she could pay her power bill. So that, as you say, is where we start, at that literally walking outside the front door and who the people that we're interacting with day to day, and trying to find common ground with them, and not be bitter all the time about how so many of us are getting screwed. I mean, bitterness for me is the number one hurdle to overcome as, you know, a member of a people who were the landless Indians for 156 years. I mean, how can an indigenous culture be landless? I mean, it seems impossible, and yet that is the truth of it, and we still essentially are. So, you know, it's easy for me to say, you know, well, to hell with all of you. My problem is bigger than yours. We're all in the same problem right now. And if we can figure out a way to get along with those folks that are probably easier to get along with, I mean, some are just straight up assholes. We have to accept that too. But most of them probably are not. And like you say, that's where we start.
If I may, I was just going to also say, I think something that I come back to is it all has to be on the table. I mean, we get to make the world the way we want it to be. And the big lie and the big seduction is that the status quo is this natural thing, that it's all working the way it has to work. And, you know, there's ups and there's downs, but what can you do? And I think a lot of good people who worry about this stuff have bought into this idea that there's just not that much you can do. And that is a lie. And the reasonable solutions are going to seem radical. I mean, we need to start talking. I mean, like you were saying, this has to come through laws. If something matters, you make it a law, you change it, you make it illegal, or you make it possible, whatever it needs to be. I mean, I'm talking about banning Airbnb. I'm not saying that's the solution, but it needs to be on the table. That sounds insane by many people's standards. They would say, are you crazy? I mean, we're talking about the city could build housing. The city could build housing run by the city with a minimum wage. I mean, these are just off the top of my head. The point isn't that these will solve the problem, but it's that this is stuff that would be considered out of bounds within our sort of current libertarian framework. And I mean libertarian for Democrats and Republicans, that basically says you can't do anything except let the market do its thing. And all of these things and anything needs to be up for debate. I mean, because nothing's off the table unless we don't want it. If you don't want to ban Airbnb, then that's fine. You can have that debate, but it's possible. You can do it. I mean, you can do all these things. You just have to say that they're on the table. That's what I believe.
Yeah, I'm going to just say my two favorite slogans I tell my students all the time. The statement that you can't fight City Hall is propaganda put out by City Hall, one. And two, that when I talk about social structures, it's not to make you feel depressed. It's because we never see a social structure walk into a bar, right? Social structures are people. We made these rules, and people made them, and we can change them. So I think understanding that structure is not some made-up word. It's a series of rules that people have decided are sort of in the background. But that's part of the reason I talk a lot about what were those structures in the book, because I want people, like when I'm doing my interview with this woman who sounds like a Marxist and who, I happen to be doing my interviews in November of 2016, right after Trump was elected, and she's getting a call from Trump thanking her for her vote. And she is talking in a way that you would think she was a Marxist, right? So realizing that people are complicated, and that when you start talking about issues rather than identity, that's where you start creating a lot of traction.
Yeah, I was just gonna to Jesse's point. I think that the excerpt we just heard from Pushed Out really illustrated that well. Which is just that this is not a fire that's going across the plains. The free market is not free. It's a man-made system that we have made. A person-made system that we have made, and we can change. And to lay down and just say it's going to do whatever it wants to is bogus. And again, to say that the free market right now is majorly hampered by the fact that our market right now is very monopolized, and we are not seeing a real vibrant economy of innovation and entrepreneurship happening against a blank canvas. We are seeing a very monopolized global economy right now. I agree with everything that's been said in terms of just making this a human thing, making this a neighbor thing, making this a social thing. This has to begin with everybody being able to at least have a conversation and at least get together on a few common grounds. I would throw in that some of the things that have really inspired me that I've seen that have been working are collective ownership, especially collective ownership of commercial properties. If anybody's got a notebook out and wants to read a little bit about the Northeast Investment Cooperative in Minneapolis, this is a group of people who pooled their money, and instead of pooling their money in the form of a bank that then gets to go make whatever investments it wants, it's a group of people who pooled their money together, and they bought a building, and they bought a commercial building in their neighborhood and opened a bike shop, and then they opened another one and opened a brewery, and then they opened another one and opened a coffee shop, and they made their own little downtown, and now all of the income that comes from that goes into the 35 households, whatever, how many group they've got around, it just goes directly into the community. These micro cycles of money are really, really what make these communities grow real wealth. They stabilize, make it much more difficult for displacement to occur. And we just don't really consider those as an option right now. Again, it's like we send all of our money to Amazon, which is way out there, and then which is nowhere, it's a cloud. And then a lot of these outside structures, nameless, faceless companies buy our land or buy our buildings. And then when we get evicted, it's like you can't talk to anybody. These local ownership, especially local ownership of commercial, so that profits can be shared and that no one has to become sort of a collective landlord, which, again, I think that the city could explore more sort of city-run housing. But these places where communities have bought commercial property and started to take ownership of the growth there and take some of those dividends really stabilizes the community. And I think communal ownership is something that we're going to see more of, and I would really encourage anyone to look into the Northeast Investment Cooperative or into the New Economy Coalition to see that stuff happening. The last thing I'll say is, speaking of annoying people, Missoula did just start the Missoula Tenants Union, which I am a member of, and there's a few of my other Tenants Union members out here in the audience today. This is an advocacy group. We're really young. We just started really this year getting going on local legislation advocacy, statewide advocacy and research, community building, arts and communications. We have our sort of sections of the union that are kind of getting traction into really imagining, this world that we want to see and seeing what tangible things we can do. And bothering the city council, being so annoying. Julian Constantini, who's in the audience, great, wonderful, annoying neighbor of mine who has gone after the building owner, right on that corner. And so I think that even it is a policy thing, and these advocacy groups can go after policy in real ways, but also it's just huge to have a group of people to be connected with who are going through something with you, and just that community building has such an effect. A human effect, and then from there you can really affect change. And honestly, we thought that the Airbnb thing was crazy as well, but Missoula's rezoning right now for the next 11 months still, and they are considering the tenants union proposal to make Airbnbs zoned only for commercial districts, which would make it so that all residential Airbnbs would have to be closed unless they had been properly signed up with the city, which almost none of them have been. So even things like that, it's like, well, here we go. Here's that lever. Here's a zoning lever we can pull, and that would wipe all these out. And it would also mean that real estate agents can no longer speculate on the price of a house involving an income from an Airbnb, which is like 400 times higher than the income from a long-term rental. So that might ding the housing market down. So you see these domino effects that we can have you really do just have to look one section in and poke a city councilor in the eye until they do something, because they're not going to until they hear from somebody. Anyway, that's my long spiel.
Can I take questions?
Sure.
I don't want people to feel like,
Yeah, people can leave or.
You can do whatever you want.
I think another wonderful success story that I just am thrilled about are the people who have bought their, been able to buy their trailer park.
Yes.
And also there's been the Bob Oaks with the Northside Westside Community Development Corporation years ago created a wonderful little block of homes, straw bale homes on land trust lands, and we've let that model die for 20 years when we should have been investing in it. And again, I think maybe that MRA money, instead of going to the number of commercial that it's gone to for years and years and years, should go to creating sustainable communities, neighborhoods for us, which I live in the Hip Strip neighborhood. It is very dense. It is right by your house. Very dense, very sustainable, very walkable. We have a huge number of commercial, neighborhood commercial, like that stall that you're talking about. It should be the model for how we are looking at how Missoula grows. I think we need to take the acres and acres and acres of asphalt around Southgate Mall and those small one-story commercial buildings and wipe them off the face of the earth and put Hip Strip neighborhoods all over them. That's kind of my
Here, here.
Yeah, that's the if you hear anyone talk about Euclidean zoning, this is sort of like the modern sense of zoning, which turned everything into all of this is residential, and all of this, it's like the same way Brasilia was designed, and now Brasilia is like so stark and cold to walk around because it's too planned. And the Euclidean system that we've been running on for so long is saying that there can't be little neighborhoods, there can't be little bodegas and little shops. But Missoula has the ability to turn that around because we've seen that it has not worked. And you can still see, over on 5th Street in Johnson or next to the tattoo parlor, you can see these where it used to be little bodegas, little stores. And I think that would be a great way to have more hip strips around town.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say,
Yeah.
It's sad to me when you can see where there used to be
Yeah.
a little store, and it's nice because people live there. That's also good. But the idea of building out is what gets you with 3 new hotels in your downtown, because everyone just wants to be downtown, and then everyone else has to drive to the downtown.
Yeah.
Awful.
Yeah. Instead of having a bunch of cute little neighborhoods. Yeah.
Another thing individuals can do, if you have money to invest, if you have a retirement account or whatever, stop investing in the stock market and invest in things like NeighborWorks, which is the organization that helps trailer park residents buy their trailer parks. Those kind of investments that are actually doing good. They may not make as much money as the stock market, but you feel a whole lot better about it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, if anyone didn't hear that, NeighborWorks is helps trailer parks collectively purchase their parks. And Bob Oaks, by the way, and the North Missoula Community Development Corporation is currently working with a group of renters on Wolf Street to make a cooperatively owned block, which is really cool. So these things are happening, and you absolutely can invest in them, and you might not make 9% or whatever Vanguard does, but you might make 7% because it's still a market, and you can keep it in your community.
Would you ever consider making a character in your play that's like a squirrel or a bird, that's also a neighbor, or you think get impacted too? We never really truly bring or set the chair aside for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, the question was, would we ever consider putting an animal or a tree or a non-human character into a play? And it just made me think of what Chris was saying when you say hello to everything. And it also makes me think of Alan Watts talking about how we all feel like human beings are separate from the earth, but just like a tree leaves, the earth peoples. We are a natural occurring thing here that lives alongside everything else. And we didn't put a character like that into our play, but Sam Myers did the touring show that went with the rep that was also about gentrification, the Castle of 10,000 Lights. I believe that there were animal characters in that show. So.
I'll just say to that, I love that question, and that's wonderful moving forward, because I think with the play, we definitely said, there's the infinite continuum of this human story, and we chose a frame, and we focused on that. But then I think we were very conscious of the fact that that's one frame, and you can scoot the frame left or right and see a whole different angle on it. And I'll say that, we did this play in Ken's backyard, which is an old Missoula fourplex, like I said, and the idea of doing it in a theater is very depressing, both because it's a great setting, but also because I think what made the play effective for people was it's a place they know, and it hits so much harder when you say not a building is being torn down, but this building is being torn down. A building is not a tree or an animal, but I think that grounding in the place was really, I think, you could extend that. I'd love to extend that the way you're talking about, to be like, let's not just think about these people, but we're also talking about people in a place, and that place is being run roughshod. And so I appreciate your comment.
Yeah, your point about your neighbor being a Trump supporter, and then the point about identity versus issues was really resonating with me. It seems like the working class has had a really hard time organizing and coming together because of identity being a large part of that. I'm curious if you have any success stories or practices about building coalition within the working class across various identities.
I mean, I have a really good example from Idaho of from a group have been really active in called Reclaim Idaho, and it started. So we expanded Medicaid in Idaho through a ballot initiative, and we just raised $410 million per year, increased funding for Idaho schools, which does not happen in Idaho. We de-invest in. I mean, Idaho is the worst version of Montana. I hate it so much, and I miss Montana so much if anyone has a job. But so the guy who started it is he's freaking brilliant. I went to high school with him, and he went to community college and kind of bumped his way along till he ended up getting a PhD in political science from Yale. It's Luke did, but he is brilliant, and he decided we need to organize around issues. And we don't use the ballot initiative process in Idaho. And let's go around issues we know that people care about. We passed Medicaid expansion with over 60% vote. We didn't actually end up getting the education funding on the ballot because because he put in a progressive tax structure in it. And when it made the ballot, they just did a special session for the legislature to pass education funding in Idaho because they didn't want the way he'd written the tax code to go into effect. So instead, they passed their own legislation with the same amount with a flat tax fee. And so what I'm saying, in both those cases, one of the things that he when I saw him doing that I thought was just brilliant was he organized around issues, very specific issues that he knew were popular. And he organized in a way that has a very little top-down structure. So he goes into a community and says, this is what I want to do, who wants to be involved? And the people who have the most time, energy, who are organized, who are smart, who care, and who are totally undervalued in our communities are older women. And he saw the power of older women in our communities, and he handed it to them and said, you do what's going to work best for your community. You want to collect signatures at church? Fine. I don't care what you do. Here's how it works. I will help you if you need help, but it's your thing to run in your community the way you see fit. And he stepped back, and he keeps doing that, and I just watch the coalitions grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's just this grassroots organizing, and it's such a wonderful model. And I think coming off that big win this week, yeah.
Well, as popular as the Trump vote was in Montana, head-to-head, he barely beat weed, which is a pretty cross boundary lines issue very similarly passed because of the efforts like were just described. But, you know, conservation groups, you know, conservation has its own kind of things that need to be overcome. But, you know, there's a lot of strong coalitions between people that used to fight tooth and nail against each other, whether it's ranchers and farmers and working class people who are typically on one side of the debate versus, you know, dirty hippies and environmentalists and people like me. You know, there's a lot of that. Like, you know, American Prairie, I was just out there doing a program with them a couple weeks ago, and they're working, you know, there's a lot of opposition, you know, save the cowboy, all these signs around central Montana. But at the same time, there are a lot of ranchers and people who are kind of crossing those boundaries that we make up to divide ourselves in support of this. Let's return millions of acres to public use through private land and trusts and all of those things so that we can restore life that we've eliminated. So, I mean, those are examples that it works.
I just want to say one other thing. I gave a talk to the Idaho Family Timber Owners Association because my high school journalism teacher's husband runs it, and he asked me to talk at it. So I was really like, oh, this is not going to be my audience, right? But oh, well, I'll do it. And I showed up, and there were like 150 people there, dudes with their guns on their hips because everyone wears their guns in Idaho. And people were crying, hugging me afterwards. You are describing what has happened to my family. And I think when we can speak to people's pain and when we acknowledge, like, yes, what is happening to you is painful and it feels unfair and the world shouldn't be like this. And I think I know what's happening, right? We have not been very good at helping, giving explanations to working class people about what is happening to them. And when they don't have explanations, they pull them from, right? We want to understand our world. And so there are lots of explanations that are happening in social media. And trying to reframe that, here's my explanation of what's happening to you. Does it resonate? And I think that's also really important for coalition building, is giving voice to people's pain. It's very easy to just say, well, those ranchers, right? Like, what do they need? I'm saying this like knowing this is my brother I'm talking about, but, you know, like acknowledging that emotion. That's one of the things I think that I like to say at my book does. My book reminds people that poor people have feelings, which seems like a revolutionary act anymore, so.
The story of Idaho that's an incredible story. I mean, I followed the Reclaim Idaho story before, and it's wild. And the thing that you both said that got me thinking was also you're describing concrete action, and I think that's a big part of it too. And I think that oftentimes the coalition building conversation can get boring, and it can get reduced down to should you like them or not. And the bottom line is you don't have to like them. You don't have to like your neighbors. I mean, I grew up on a farm, and I knew all my neighbors, and I knew that they were there in case anything happened, and we could count on each other if anything happened. We didn't go to dinner with each other. We didn't, you know, I mean, they were farm families. They did business with each other. That was about it. And that's okay. And I think it's important, you know, you don't have to like these people. And if you just meet them to say, let's be in coalition with each other, that can be a beautiful thing if you want to get to know them and have a human connection. But when you have a concrete goal, we want to ban Airbnbs, we want to get Medicare on the ballot, we're going to use the ballot initiative. That's where I think coalition building happens, where you don't have to change their minds. You don't have to say you're my best friend. And I think that's what's often hard is politics is so abstract for people now. They don't know what the levers of power are. And so it all becomes about who do you like, who do you not like. And I think that finding those places, like no one would think to do a ballot initiative. Not many people. She just said they've never done one in Idaho. So those are the things where I think a lot of the times the coalitions fall apart because there's nothing to coalesce around. What's the thing that's actually going to happen? So part of it is figuring out, yeah, like we're all talking about these people better than me. What are the actual concrete things we can achieve as a community? Because when it comes to that, your neighbor will say, well, I like Trump and you like Bernie or whoever. We both want to get the pothole fixed, or we both want to put a four-way stop here so kids don't get hit while they're playing in the street. You know, those are the things. So it's as much about that open-heartedness as it is about, I think, the hard focus that allows you to say, what are the actual goals we can achieve with our power?
I just want to tack one example of that into the Montana Democratic Party released their sort of like lead up statistics for the last election cycle in the state house 2 years ago. And when you get these reports from a lot of these statewide organizations, you see where the Republican and Democratic parties give up fights really, really easily. And it's especially when it is this state or national level where it is so abstract. And when people do forget that there are these very local, concrete things that people want. And one of the things I read in the report was that they did a survey of ranchers and farmers in Havre, the North Havre area. I forget the name of the county. It wasn't in Havre. So, and all these people of both affiliations, registered as Republican and Democrat, had all submitted the answer to the flyer as saying, what's the most pressing issue in your community? And all these ranchers had said, there's a monopolized meat processing facility. We are suffering from monopoly in this county, and the Republican representative here is failing us because he works for them. I mean, it was one of those very small town common stories. And the Democrats were like, decided not to try. And it happens all over the place because it's a strategic move. And they say, well, we haven't flipped it for 60 years, so why would we flip it? And they would never think to say, well, there's an issue that you could actually win on here. There's a union angle here. There's an anti-monopoly angle that could win a Democratic vote from someone who might be registered a Republican, but is going to go for an issue before they would go for their identity. And I think that when you do see these things, you realize that on a local level, there is so much power that everyone in this room does have. If you see an issue, you can build a coalition. People will listen to you because most of the time, politicians talk total bullshit. So if you walk in and you have a real thing you want to talk about, it's a huge leg up right off the bat.
So just to follow up to that, actually, there's so many things I can say, endless things, but I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey, and Congressional District 11 was the largest red to blue flip in the 2018 midterm cycle. And if you had told people even 2 years earlier that was going to happen, everybody would have doubted you, and now it's considered secure blue. So you just never know, like demographic change did play a role in that. But you just never know what is actually going to happen. So I guess I just want to say to everybody gathered here, among other things, don't count out, the Montana congressional cycle here and now in this state, now that we have 2 congressional districts here.
Well, in some of these communities, too, we're talking about dozens of votes that you can flip it, or a couple hundred at most. It doesn't take that. I mean, you've got the tribes who are rebuilding buffalo herds that have to go to Superior to get it processed from Browning, or bring in Wild Ideas mobile bison from South Dakota. What a great idea, and what a failure of the Democrats to not recognize that. I'm dumbfounded.
Yeah, so was I.
My dad was a dairy farmer and in the Flathead, and when I was a kid, there were lots of dairy farmers in the Flathead, and then there were fewer and fewer because you had to process the milk an hour away, and then you had to process the milk 10 hours away. And a lot of people got out of dairy farming. Well, probably a lot of them did because they wanted to sell their land and develop it because it made them rich. But I also know a lot of them just stopped because it's the system set against that. I mean, it's not a choice anymore at that point. It's like, oh yeah, you can keep selling milk. You just have to pay 10 times as much to get it processed 10 times as far away. And it's like, that's a great choice, yeah. And I think that's behind a lot of these things. Oh, these all used to be farmland. Well, it's not just because people said farming's boring one day, So just to say, there's almost always those, you trace it back far enough, a lot of people who, and I think, again, that's that natural process mindset that says, alas, farmers were a thing and now they're not, everyone's on their phones or something. But, that's usually, it's because the processing plant got moved and there's nowhere to get the work done. And yeah, that people will vote on that, but they don't get to.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming today, and thank our panelists, too, for this great discussion and reading. I feel like this could just keep going, and hopefully it will. Thank you.